Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to our webinar on Israeli politics. We are heading toward the November elections, fewer than 90 days left for the elections. I'm Ori Nir, and with me is my colleague, Madeline Cheragino. She's APN's Director of Government Relations. Before I introduce our guest, Chemi Shalev, I will remind you, as I usually do, of our usual housekeeping notes. This webinar, as you probably know by now, is recorded. You'll be able to view the video on our YouTube channel, hopefully sometime tomorrow, and listen to the audio on our podcast, Peacecast, hopefully sometime today. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, as always, you're invited and even encouraged to ask questions. Please do that using the Q&A tool that's on the bottom of your screen, not the raise hand tool, but the Q&A tool. And please keep your questions short. We're reading them, as we go along during the webinar, and we don't have the ability and the time to process long questions and long statements. So short questions, please. With that, I'd like to introduce to you our guest today. My friend Chemi Shalev. He's a seasoned analyst of Israeli and American politics and of Israeli-US relations. He covered these topics for, and other things, of course, for over 4 decades as a senior correspondent and columnist for a wide variety of Israeli newspapers, including the Jerusalem Post, Davar, Maariv, Yisrael Hayom, and most recently Haaretz, including a 5-year stint as the newspaper's correspondent in New York. He also served as the Jerusalem correspondent of The Forward. I had the pleasure of working with Chemi at The Forward, and I'm sure that many of you have read his excellent analysis on Haaretz's English edition. I found, after reading his columns at Haaretz in recent years, that I always say to myself after reading such a column, here's someone who expressed my thoughts much better than I could have ever done. So Chemi is joining us from his home in Givatayim, Israel, just outside of Tel Aviv. Thank you, Chemi, for being our guest.
My pleasure.
Madeline, would you like to start?
I would love to. Thank you for joining us, Chemi. So I'm sure you've been getting this a lot, but this is the 4th time in less than 5 years that the Israelis have gone to the polls to elect a new Knesset. And I was just wondering how this round is different from the last ones. Is this round like previous ones, more recent ones, a referendum on Netanyahu, or is it something else now that we've actually had a successful government between elections?
Well, that is the big difference, in fact, between these elections and previous elections that we've had in the past 2 years. I don't know how much of an impact this difference will make, and that is that Netanyahu is not the incumbent prime minister. He does not have all the powers of the state to use to advance his political aims, and that right now belongs to Yair Lapid. So that could make a difference. There is also a difference that people are sick of these elections, and there is a difference that players have moved around. Whether that means that in any way the tie that has, in fact, paralyzed Israel, the political tie, whether any of these things are going to break the tie, I don't know. But as to your question on the referendum of Netanyahu, let me here, and this is going to be the only time I'm going to take like a little bit more time. Imagine that Donald Trump is running for president. He gets elected by the Republican Party. We are in 2024, and he's running, never mind against who. Now, are those elections, just by the same token, one, those elections are going to be all about Trump, just like our elections are all about Bibi. And two, those elections are going to be about the future of the United States. Every elections are, but these are two, that whatever result you get, the country is going to go in one of two diametrically opposed directions. If Trump gets elected, you have one America, and if whoever is Democratic, or the same, by the way, in 2024. we are, despite the fact that we have two different systems, and every time Americans say, yes, you have this, you have a very complex system with lots of parties and nobody ever wins. And it's, in this case, no one is better situated in the world than Americans to understand what elections we're having, because we are having elections as if Donald Trump is running. Now, I'm not saying that Bibi and Trump are the same, but when you look at the forces arrayed one against the other, anti-democratic forces on the one hand, fundamentalist religious forces on the one hand, people that are not too appreciative of democracy, and a large section of disaffected, in the American case, white middle-class Americans. And on the other hand, you have this very strange coalition of people that we used to call left and right, who are defending democracy. I mean, if you look at at Cheney in the committee, we have our Cheneys, meaning people who are still on the right but have defected to the left. What am I trying to say? That there is if Americans and anybody who's interested should look at our elections and view them as more or less, in the grand scheme of things, the same questions are going to be decided in Israel as they will be in the United States. And that is because of this unique situation we have of these two people, Trump and Netanyahu, and the historical circumstances that they bring with them. Yeah, okay.
So, Chemi, I'm trying to figure out where the energy is in this election campaign. I just came back from 3 weeks in Israel. I was in Jerusalem for the entire 3 weeks. And I have to tell you, during those 3 weeks, the only billboards and flyers that I've seen on the street in Jerusalem were for the extremist Kahanist party, the religious Zionism party. Now, this is Jerusalem, granted. I know that Jerusalem doesn't reflect the overall sentiments, political sentiments in Israel, but still, it's the largest city in Israel. And so my question to you is, do you agree, or do you have the same sense that this party is going to be the story of these elections, and that's where the energy is this time around?
The story of these, first of all, I agree that they will do well, unfortunately, and all the indications are that they will do well. There was a recent poll of young Israelis where they had, I think, 40% support or 30% support. So they are going to do well, but whether that means that they will be the story of the elections depends on everything else that happens, because even if they do spectacularly well, say, and get 10 seats, if altogether the anti-Netanyahu forces have a majority, then it doesn't matter that except for the fact that they're going to make a lot of trouble inside parliament. As to the energy, one, yes, you're right. The only place where you can see real energy is on the far right among young people. I don't know how much that's going to translate into, but don't forget, this is July. I mean, I know we have a long election campaign supposedly, but it's not really long, because 2 months are summer vacation. No Israeli in his right mind is going to pay attention to politics. So this campaign starts on September 1st, and even that only on condition that the schools open on time, which is never certain. And if the schools don't open on time, then Israelis won't get around to this, like only until a few weeks before the election. And by then, I don't know where the energy will be, whether it's coming or going. I can tell you that the right is very confident, and the left is, and I say left with quotation marks, and the left is, as usual, very afraid. And well, we can go on, but
Sure.
Well, speaking of the left, I assume most of our participants are interested in the dynamics in Israel's center and left of center. How are they faring as we get into November? Understanding, of course, that this is August and a lot can change.
Well, we don't know anything right now. The only thing we know for sure is that Maariv Michaeli will be the leader of Labor, and we don't know what their list will look like. It'll have a lot of women in it. I'll go party by party and then just say, but she is not doing as well as people expected. And even though Labor is not close yet, or is not very close to the threshold vote. You know, we have a threshold vote where if you don't make it past the threshold, you don't get into the parliament, and all the people and the votes of all the people who voted for you get thrown away.
And so that's what 3.5%.
Yeah, and so this is a disaster for. I think is it 3.5? I think they lowered it to 2.5, but we can check it.
Okay.
And this is whichever side of the map this happens to, it's a disaster, because, like, say a party was supposed to get 4 seats but didn't make it past the threshold, that's 4 seats gone from that side. And that is actually, first of all, the name of the game in these elections. Will there be among the major parties a party that won't make it past the threshold? Which is why I mentioned that Labor, as of now, is not yet in danger. But there are circumstances in which it could very well be in danger. The Meretz, which I think, I don't know really, maybe I thought I would say it's the party people here most identify with, but maybe that's not true, is facing a leadership battle between the veteran Zahava Galon and the general who seems sort of out of place in Meretz, Yair Golan. The conventional wisdom, and everybody who knows anything about Meretz, says that Zahava Galon will win. I'm not so sure, but I'm taking them at their word. And that means that Meretz will have a traditional list. And that means that it will hover around the threshold vote. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on Labor and Meretz to run together. I'll just give a short word about the Arab sector. The hero of the past year, Mansour Abbas, on Saturday, this upcoming Saturday, will name his list, or the party will name their list. And he's supposed to get a list that will be more cooperative this time in doing whatever it is that Mansour Abbas wants to do. And in the joint list, the last party on the left, there's the leader is supposed to be replaced. It's not certain. They're not ready yet. But we have to mention that this is a critical factor, and there are, say, very deep concerns on the left that the Arab vote is going to be lower this time than it was even last time, and that this will, sort of negate any efforts to achieve a majority. But it's too early to tell. If Netanyahu says, it's enough that Netanyahu will insult the Arabs on one thing or another, and they'll come out in droves, as he said famously once. All in all, the left is demoralized. Does not have a leadership that they may support their leaders, but they don't have a leader that they think will take them out of their misery. And frankly, I'm sorry to say that the fact that we're talking here about 12 members of the Knesset, of the Jewish left, that more or less accurately reflects the strength of the left. And don't forget that a lot of these lefties are not interested in the same issues as other lefties. Yair Golan, the candidate for Meretz, said the other day that he doesn't think climate change is so important. And people jumped all over him. But there were other people who inside Meretz, I'm talking, who completely supported him and said, yeah, talking about climate change is a luxury. The left does not have any hope or any wish to gain power. It has invested itself completely in Yair Lapid, which we should, get to next. But Yair Lapid is not left. The parties that I mentioned are the left, and it's not a very, we've seen better days, and there is a chance that this sad state of affairs will turn into catastrophe if one of these two parties doesn't pass the threshold.
Thank you so much. While we're talking about, platforms and what different candidates are prioritizing here, I did have a follow-up question for you. And that's, there was an interview with Zahava Galon today on Haaretz. And this time around, she said she's running on a social justice platform. Similarly for Yair Golan. Is the occupation a losing issue to campaign on? Are people just losing interest? Or, even for Meretz, it seems no longer something that they're focusing on.
It's a non-issue. Amazing as that may seem, it's a non-issue. I am making one reservation, and that is that it is also events dependent. So that if we have a flare-up in Gaza, and if the flare-up in Gaza moves over to the West Bank, it'll take center place again. But the occupation is hardly covered in the media. It is hardly talked about in living rooms anymore. And the politicians, if they can, they try to stay away from it. And it's not because, I mean, there is, it's true that positions of people, according to most polls, have moved to the right, but it's not, that hasn't been so dramatic as a sense of futility in the sense is that there's no point in talking about it. The only caveat I have for that, I heard a rumor today, and I can't say if it's more than a rumor, that when he comes to New York in September, Lapid might meet Abu Mazen, a one-on-one meeting. Now, he is probably carrying out polls right now to see if it pays off or doesn't pay off. But if such a meeting does take place, that will be quite a significant public, dramatic raising of the public profile. And it would mean that Lapid is running on a peace ticket, and or at least a partial peace ticket, and he's been one of the people that's been running away from the Palestinians. So that would be a significant development, or vice versa. If he doesn't meet with Abu Mazen, then it's more of the same. But yes, that's the situation. There is talk of settlements, usually from the point of view of why the government isn't making illegal outposts legal any faster. And individual incidents are discussed, but Israelis, and this is not completely unconnected, are much more distressed these days by what is going on, one, inside the crime rate inside the Israeli Arab sector, which bothers them theoretically, but the developing situation in the south with the Bedouins is getting out of hand, and it's becoming dangerous, and it could blow up before the elections and become a hot potato. I don't know, it's hard to tell who would be hurt and who would benefit. But that has only a tangential, a connection to the occupation. So yes, it's crazy, but the occupation is a non-issue.
We already have some questions in the Q&A, and I'd like to encourage people to keep on asking. Our board member, Bob Friedman, reminds us that the election threshold is 3.25%. That's right. Yeah, and we have a question about the likely outcome of these elections. If you look at polls, there is a trend that shows that Likud is gaining power. Do you see, Chemi, as the most likely scenario a coalition headed by Likud, therefore by Netanyahu, with a variety of right-wing parties, and religious parties, of course?
But you mean the whole bloc, like the Netanyahu bloc?
Right.
Look, first of all, I don't believe in. It's not that I don't believe in polls, because I, in fact, used to handle polls in one of my jobs for many years in Maariv. But I don't trust the current polls, because contrary to, I mean, they're done by all sorts of people in all sorts of ways. It's very difficult to tell which is, and we don't have any code for who the broadcasters put on and put out. So I don't know about the polls, first of all. Second of all, if you ask me right now, everything is open. Meaning, I think it's too early. I don't think people's minds have gelled about who they're going to vote for. And I think that part of this, there is this buzz in the media that, yes, Netanyahu is going to win. Yes, Netanyahu is going to win. I think this is a Netanyahu spin. And I don't think, and this is important, I don't think Netanyahu is part of it, in the sense that I don't think he shares the confidence that his people are showing. Because first of all, I'll remind you that when there were the contacts to set a date, suddenly, he wasn't in a hurry, and he didn't want elections. He was looking for a way to set up a government without going to elections. And people who know him also say that he's completely not sure. And if Netanyahu isn't sure, that's something that should be very seriously taken into account, because he has a lot of faults, Netanyahu. Reading polls is not one of them. And if he's worried, then he has a reason to be worried. And if he has a reason to be worried, then I have a reason not to be as worried, perhaps, as I was. And we don't know. I have to mention his name, even though I think it's a fading possibility that he would join. But there's still the question of the former chief of staff, Gadi Eisenkot, who is widely liked and who said that he was going to join politics, and who has been courted by both Benny Gantz and Lapid and Labor even, and who has not made a decision. I can tell you that he's told people that he's going to make a decision in 2 weeks, but his decision might be not to join. So that would have jolted something. And we have to see how there's so many things that still have to happen. For example, the makeup of the Likud list. Is it going to be a list made up of convicts, cranks, and I read this about Trump, so I'm just using it. Convicts, cranks, and co-conspirators or something, or usual. And again, Bibi, who brought to the fore anybody who was willing to defend him in his criminal case, and so that Likud became a party of really kooks. People, I'm not going to get into names, but most of the people who are now have been representing Likud in the media are kooks. And that was fine with Bibi because the people who weren't kooks weren't willing to defend him. Now that he has elections, he doesn't want these kooks to lead the list because he knows that people, the voters, even Likud voters, they don't want a list just of kooks. So he is now making a furious effort to make sure that in the primaries that are going to be held in the Likud later this month, that he doesn't get a list of kooks, which would hurt him and change the equation. So there are too many known unknowns, as Mr. Rumsfeld said, and certainly too many unknown unknowns, because even now we're looking at a situation where at any moment there could be a flare-up in Gaza. And if there's a flare-up in Gaza, it doesn't matter what we've been talking about. Everything is going to be started, start all over. If the government if there's a successful, obviously, if there's a successful military operation, it does the government well. If it takes too long or there are too many casualties, that could finish the elections. Now, just to get to your last question, one looks at the Israeli elections, one should never lose sight of the fact that Netanyahu never loses sight of the fact that his main goal in life is not to be prime minister, and it is not to deal with the Iranian nuclear agreement, but it is to get out of jail. He has devoted the last 2 years just to that, not to anything else. We went to 5 elections because of that. Because if that was not true, then I would tell you that if Netanyahu gets 61, he's not going to set up a government with Itamar Ben-Gvir. What is he, crazy? The old Netanyahu, the pre-trial Netanyahu, no, he would set up a government with Gantz and with Sa'ar and with whoever, and he'd be prime minister and he'd be happy with. But that kind of government won't give him what he wants, which is a get out of jail free card. And the only government that will give him what he wants is a government of the most radical right-wing government Israel has ever seen. And the people who are going to be joining this government, the other parties except for Likud, they know that Netanyahu will pay anything in order to. So that is why that situation is different and dangerous. There is no scenario that Netanyahu becomes suddenly this moderate prime minister again. That's not going to happen. It's either he'll do something else. He'll sign a plea bargain if he becomes prime minister, but it's not a government that gives him what he wants. He probably sign a plea bargain before he goes. I'm going to drink something and you can talk.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to touch upon 2 other sectors in Israeli political life in our coming 2 questions. The first one, I guess, will be the ultra-Orthodox, and we have a question coming from one of our participants who is asking, and I think the answer is pretty easy here. Is there any chance that Shas would join a center-left party that's headed by Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz? Do you see that?
But there is a chance that Agudat Yisrael, Yadut HaTorah, Degel HaTorah, what are called the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox party, is not going to join a Lapid-led coalition if Bibi can form a government. If Bibi cannot form a government, then contrary to the situation that we had up until now, there is a good chance that Agudat Yisrael would join a coalition. And if that happens, I think eventually Shas would come around. But in the first instance, Shas is not a candidate to join a Lapid-led coalition. Agudat Yisrael is, and that could change things. But just we have to remember the reverse of that, and that is that the Ra'am, the Arab, the Mansour Abbas's Arab Muslim party, would also join under certain circumstances a Netanyahu government. I don't think those circumstances are realistic because, as I said, he needs a complete right wing, and he needs a full right wing coalition. But that could happen; they could move. So those are the options. We either get a right wing coalition, we get another repeat of this. Somehow Lapid, brings it in for there, or what people are thinking, we're going to go to the 6th elections. I personally, I'm just adding this because we spoke about it before. I think that Netanyahu, if there's subterranean energy, I'm talking about your energy question. I think that, what is it that Biden used to call low energy? Something like that. I think it was low energy.
Sleepy Joe.
Sleepy Joe. There's something that is not ticking this time around for Netanyahu, as well as in previous things are not necessarily going well. They're not going his way, but he is in control of the agenda. One has to admit that. We can get into it. I mean, it's a separate issue, but the Israeli media has also changed, by the way. What has changed? The Israeli media is much more sympathetic to Bibi than you would imagine. And it is cooperating with him in the sense that it is setting his agenda for the elections. Now, that's a separate issue, the Israeli media, but the media in this case is definitely not on one side or another. Which is also a sad state of affairs, but.
You're muted.
Sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
I have a question for you about the Arab parties. We have one in the chat. I'll start there and I'll move into another question we had. But the question was, did Mansour Abbas deliver for his constituents enough where he could pull votes from the joint list? And more generally, what is the situation among the Arab sector, and how did his breaking of the taboo of participations of Arab parties in the coalition make a significant change? And is that change going to carry forward through this election?
I'm not an expert on the Israeli Arab population, and I think even the experts are stymied to explain exactly what the currents are. Most of the people who voted for Mansour Abbas were satisfied with his performance in the coalition. A lot of people in the joint list were angry at their party that they didn't do what Mansour Abbas did before them, because the joint list had been talking all these years about doing what Mansour Abbas actually did. But and Mansour Abbas, I think, he's not 100% sure, but he's quite sure of getting over the threshold at which he wasn't last time. So that would be perhaps a manifestation of the change in his position. But what is it? And I'm asking you because I don't know the answer. Why is it, or how is it possible that after all this, the Arabs would go to vote 40%, 30%? I don't know. And when Jews try to tell Arabs to go vote, they are offended because they feel that it's condescending. And I'm not going to judge them. Maybe it is condescending. And they are especially offended when you tell them you have to go vote for yourself, not for me, the Jew, but for yourself. And I cannot explain how they can respond, which is, and many, it doesn't make any difference to us whether it's this or that. And I have no explanation for how this is possible. And I just want to point out that the Arabs comprise of 21% of the population and about close to 18% of the voting population. And 18% of the voting population is, I will now, how much is it? A fifth? It is 20 wait, 3.6, yeah, 21. How much is it? 18 times 1.2, 3.6, yeah, 25, I think 25 Knesset seats. Never mind, 24, 26. So that if all the Arab...
Potentially, you mean, yeah.
Yeah. If they all went to vote, that's what they would get. If they went to vote, just like the Jews went to vote, they would have 17 or 18 seats. And they would, in the first case, they would just control parliament. In the second case, they would be the kingmakers. For the life of me, I cannot understand. I can understand, but it is frustrating for a Jewish leftist to confront the fact that whatever he does, we could lose the elections because the Arabs have decided not to come and vote for their own reasons, which may or may not be valid, but they are not what we feel is the main event right now, which is a battle for democracy. And anyway, I told you, I fail to understand why they can't differentiate between a coalition that swears by democracy and another coalition that swears by the destruction of democracy. But I don't have the answer for that. It worries us a lot. And the only thing is that things could change because, something could happen.
Having covered that beat for Haaretz years ago, I covered Israel's Arab population between 2000 and 2002, very, decisive years in that field. I've read a lot about it, and there are many reasons why Arab citizens vote, are not enthusiastic voters, but we won't get into it now. We can talk about it some other time.
Although there have been elections where they voted in significant numbers.
Right, but never as high as the
never as high. No.
Yeah. Chemi, I want to ask you a little bit about. So you were the one who made who brought Trump and the U.S. situation into the picture earlier. There's a strong feeling here in the United States, as you probably know, that if Trump is elected in a little more than 2 years, he will come back with a vengeance. So what I'd like you to describe and analyze is what would be the agenda, other than staying out of prison, as you pointed out before, for Netanyahu. What would be the broader agenda for a Netanyahu-headed coalition?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure it would be the agenda of Netanyahu, but would be the agenda extorted by the parties that want to join his coalition, and he has no choice but to give in, because some of the things that interest them don't necessarily interest him. The tragedy, I think, is that his personal issue meshes with their overall or their number one priority. And the number one priority of the rabid right wing or extreme right wing has been to undermine the justice system. So that for many reasons, among them, that the settlers would be able to do whatever they want, whenever they want, and nobody, which might soon be the situation anyway. And so their first target is to disrupt the justice system. And here, just by if there is ever a thing, like if there's a talk of maybe the legislative French law, which would mean that you can't prosecute prime ministers, right? Now that supposedly is just a legal thing, but it would change. It would be a breakdown of the system, and they would then, and according, they say that openly. I mean, at best, they're going to purge the top echelons of the justice ministry. There are and they have a similar agenda with the territories. Some of them are for full annexation. None of them are for improving anything to do with the Palestinians. They will try to extend the control of the chief rabbinate. It's a nationalistic, fundamentalist religious agenda, which has piggybacked on a prime minister who is very influential and very talented, who has something completely different in mind. But if the conditions are right, they could both achieve their goals. And if you're asking me, we always say that before every election, we say, oh, it's going to be terrible. True, but we only need once for it to come true. And if ever it's going to come true, it's going to be this time. That is on the assumption, and I want to mention something. That is on the assumption, one, that he'll win the elections. And I want to say a few, just if you'll allow me, even though you didn't ask about Lapid and Gantz. One.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Lapid is the most underestimated politician in Israeli history, perhaps. Anybody who knew him as a journalist, and I knew him as a journalist, anybody who knew him as a journalist or as a TV presenter, never thought for a second that he would want to be prime minister, that he would have the patience, the diligence, or that he would have, and he has confounded people along the way, all along the way. He's always done what people said he's never going to do. So now that people are saying he's certain to lose the elections, I take that with a grain of salt, and I take that with a grain of salt, among other things, because Netanyahu has not faced a consummate TV person like Lapid before. I mean, that was Netanyahu's thing. He ruled the airwaves. That's not true with Lapid. And also, and this for me is an important point. Whatever, people admire Bibi, they idolize Bibi. Nobody thinks Bibi reflects Israeliness. Nobody thinks that Bibi is a typical Israeli. Nobody. The one thing that has accompanied Lapid from the start of his career is that he has this uncanny ability to express Israeliness. And I think that in an election campaign, if you do it right, expressing, the essence of the nationhood could be a very powerful weapon. And therefore, I'm not writing him off. I just want to point out that he is today the greatest danger to Meretz and to Labor, because there are a lot of lefties who want to vote for him, who think he deserves it, who think he's done a wonderful job. They owe him. And if too many of these people vote for him, then, we're going to lose everything, because then both parties might not pass the threshold. The second thing is Benny Gantz. Benny Gantz thought when he recently united with Gideon Sa'ar to his right. And he thought that this would be sort of a deal breaker, a game changer that would put him on a par with Lapid, and that he could then claim to be the man who's supposed to be prime minister by virtue of the fact that he can bring in other partners that Lapid can't. But the polls have not supported or have not lived up to his hopes. And I think it's quite obvious to me that for some people who voted for Benny Gantz, Gideon Sa'ar, even though, we appreciate his stand against Netanyahu, is just too much right wing, and they're leaving him. And there could even be people, by the way, on the other side. So unless something dramatic happens, Gantz's bid to have a two-headed race against Netanyahu is going to fail. It will be Lapid against Netanyahu. And even though if you would have asked me, a few years ago, okay, we have this race, Lapid against Netanyahu, I would have laughed my head off. I don't know. Lapid has got hidden, talents. He's got hidden strengths and hidden talents that might come forth in the right timing. You have to say, though, this is my final comment on this, for Lapid, it's much harder to set up a government. He doesn't have a natural coalition. And if Bibi doesn't get 59, it doesn't get 61, and he gets 58. So one, you have to make sure that nobody, you have a lot of people who are going to be Bibi will try to buy them to join the coalition, including Mansour Abbas. So the other possibility is, let's say, what does that mean? If Bibi gets 58, it means that the Lapid side has 62. But we have the same problem as we always have. Who are these 62? These a lot of they don't necessarily agree to sit with each other. Final party, I won't go on with this anymore, is the party set up by Ayelet Shaked, the justice minister, and formerly Bennett's, who we haven't mentioned either, Bennett's deputy, along with Yoaz Hendel. And one thing is for sure, they are the two most beautiful politicians ever in Israeli politics. And if they're together, it's like, wow. And
they call their party the Zionist Spirit, right?
The Zionist Spirit, yeah. I mean, he's like a movie star. And anyway, so right now they're doing well. And because they're doing well in the polls, people are starting to think about, whether they are going to, supposedly they're part of the anti-Bibi bloc, but they will go with Bibi as Shaked has already said. I'm not sure that they can maintain this level in the polls, because other than the fact that they're good looking and the fact that, they were in the headlines this week, I'm not sure they can generate the kind of, and I think that when things get tough, they're going to lose their support and they will not get into the Knesset. That's my opinion.
If they do cross the threshold, Chemi, do you think they will join a Netanyahu-headed coalition?
Look, Shaked says that and both of them say they will join only if it's a broad-based government, meaning they won't join this kind of right-wing Looney Tunes government that we've been talking about. Now, that would be logical. It would be logical to assume that if that was the case, then they will impose on Bibi more moderate sort of broad-based coalition with Gantz and so on. Again, all of that would be true in a theoretical sense, were it not for the fact that that's not what interests Bibi. Bibi has to get out of jail, and you have to keep on reminding yourself that that is his only target in mind. There's no other point to anything, and that won't serve him. Shaked's coalition doesn't serve Bibi's interests, and so it's hard to see how it would happen. If he wouldn't have a choice, maybe, but it's certainly not his first choice or second choice. I'm not sure she would join, by the way, a government on the other side either. I mean, she had a very difficult time living with Lapid before, and I don't think it's going to get any easier for her afterwards.
So I have another question for you about Bibi, and that's whether or not you think this anti-Bibi sentiment among members of the current coalition is going to hold steady, or do you think some of them are going to cave and would be willing to join a coalition with him?
Look, first of all, it's certainly, we said the Mansour Abbas's Arab Party would be willing. The joint list can't, I don't see how they can join Netanyahu. I mean, it's more difficult for them to work out the kind of deal that Mansour Abbas can work out by the fact that they are a nationalistic party and he has nothing to give them on that. Whereas Abbas it's easier for Abbas, let's put it that way. And so I don't think that they would do it. Meretz certainly not, Labor certainly not, Lapid certainly not. Ayelet Shaked, we already said, would. Now we come to the big question of Gantz, the Gantz-Sa'ar party. And it's interesting that of those two, there's a bigger chance that Gantz would want to join Netanyahu coalition than Sa'ar. Sa'ar has been, I mean, you have to hand it to him, he's been like a man of steel concerning his refusal to join Netanyahu. And Gantz is always playing on dancing in several weddings, and you have to always take into account that Gantz is very angry, very insulted, very, I don't know what I'm looking for a word, towards Lapid. He's not full of goodwill towards Lapid. And so that's not reason enough, of course, and it'll be difficult for Gantz to take his party into a coalition with Bibi. But if everything, say without them, they have, but with, say Ayelet Shaked goes and they have 62 or 63 without Gantz and Sa'ar, and Netanyahu is willing to accept them, then I would assume they would go, yes, if they, because if they would be saving the country, which is what Shaked's claim is going to be. They're saving the country from all the bad things that Netanyahu would do if he had a minority coalition. But as I said again, he's not interested in anything else.
Chemi, I want to go. You've been a Bibi watcher for many years, and you point out, I think correctly, that
I was trying to figure it out. It is now 38 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're pointing out that his main motivation was to stay out of prison. Now, I'm interested in what you think was his motivation in before he was indicted. Was it, and there's a great deal of kind of debate about this among other Bibi watchers, and some think that some think that his main motivation was just to stay in power for the sake of staying in power because he's power hungry, and others think that he actually views himself as someone who's being put by history at a certain place to save Israel and the Jewish people from disaster. that his agenda and that his self-perception is much broader and much larger. Where do you stand? What do you think?
First of all, there's a saying in Hebrew, we say ishiyut mesuchsechet. I don't know exactly how you translate that, but his personality is at odds with itself. Yeah. And so there are many cross streams and so on. And I also have to tell you, I don't think the Netanyahu that is of today is the Netanyahu that I knew. And I knew him, well into his second premiership. But somehow around 2015, it's a big mystery, something happened, something changed in him. And this was even before the indictment. It may have had something to do with Sheldon Adelson and the whole Iran thing. But definitely since his indictment, he has become a different person. Now, I don't want to say, and Bibi has always talked about the fact, that the media is against him and the justice system is against him. And you can't say, I used to think, he's an elitist after all, and everything came to him so easy. So it must be an act, a sham, but it never was. He always felt deprived, no matter what size the golden spoon in his mouth, he was always deprived. His rivals were always treated much better. This has been a constant theme with him. Even when he fantastically beat Shimon Peres in 1996 after the Rabin assassination, he still complained about the media all the time. And don't forget, he comes from a family, especially a father, who, when Bibi grew up, his father told him all the time how the leftists are going to, deprive him of his rights. But I think it was the realization that this thing got serious. Like, yes, if he does, he's going to go to jail if he doesn't get out of this thing. And the fact that all of his tactics and whatever he did, nothing helped. And the fact that I don't want to, I don't know that much, and I don't want to get into it. His family situation got more aggravated. Let's say his family members got more and more aggravated as their legal situation got worse. And something snapped in him, and it didn't snap completely, but he became a different person. So that, yes, up until 2015, if you ask me, he saw himself as a historic figure, and he at least believed that he had other, exalted motivations for being in politics, not only as and I think he's a very smart person. He's very well read. He has a well-constructed ideology, and I'm sure that is true. But then when it became a fight for himself, everything got uvat, ivut. Everything got distorted.
Distorted, yeah.
And so his complaint, his historic complaints about how Cherut or Likud was not treated fairly by them, it all became personal. It all suddenly became personal for him. And I'll remind you of really the most horrific scene. I don't want to compare it because it's not our January 6th, but the scene where Netanyahu stands with his ministers behind him with their COVID masks on, and they look like some group of evil angels, and he stands there, and that was the day of the start of his trial, and he preaches against the system. There was something, we crossed a red line there, and especially since nothing happened. Netanyahu, in and of himself, does not seek, say, to change the justice system from one, to become a completely right-wing religion. That's not his. If it's a price, but yes, it is a price that he will be willing to pay. Because in my opinion, he will be willing to pay any price in order to achieve his aim. Because he, I don't know really, in the normal world, Bibi, once he was indicted, he would have resigned, he would have gone to trial, and if he's innocent, he would have been exonerated. Instead, we've got this soap opera that's been going on for so many years, and it all revolves around the same thing. Supposedly, and I'm saying supposedly, because this is it's just like in America, or maybe a bit more so. This is a war of cultures. There is a war of cultures, which happens to have been distilled into Bibi's own personal thing. There is Bibi represents the resentment, all the people who are resentful of the way the establishment treated them. And that includes a lot of North African Jews. people who, the system didn't do well by them, people who are not doing that well. And I just read a report in the New York Times about how the American population is stratifying into two separate entities. The Republicans are, I don't know, I think they were rural and, less educated. There's a big article how it's getting worse and worse. It's like two different people. So there is some of that in Israel too. The gap, it's not so much geographic, but the gap, instead of getting better, has gotten worse. And Netanyahu and Trump they thrive off of these resentments. And in order to thrive off of them, they have to make them worse, which is what they do. Both of them do quite successfully.
We've talked about a lot of the key players, but I was reminded by a question in the chat that we haven't actually had a chance to talk about Avigdor Lieberman and how he plays into this and where we see his career going in the next election.
Well, Avigdor Lieberman, first of all, I have to say, is also one of these surprising people who, when he said he wasn't going to go with Netanyahu, nobody believed him. And it turned out that, he's like rock solid in that. Also, he had the time of his life over the past year because he was Minister of Finance. He didn't care about anything. He did what he wanted. And it was like, it was quintessential Lieberman. He's king of the hill. And by virtue of the fact that he held the most powerful ministerial portfolio in which you can reward the people that need rewarding, his electoral situation hasn't fluctuated all that much. And he is apparently assured of getting in, again, not like last time. And I'm assumed that if there is another government, he'll be in a top position. I don't know, thinking between Lieberman and Saar, who would be the first to capitulate and go with Netanyahu? I don't know what the answer is. I mean, they're both of them very tough cookies. And Lieberman is also, I have to ask myself whether he has also kept a low profile. He hasn't been that much in the headlines. And perhaps one of the reasons is that against the backdrop of the Russia-Ukrainian war, and with him being sort of identified with Russia, perhaps he wanted to lower profile, although I think now that I hear myself saying it, I don't think it's true.
You used pretty unflattering terms to describe the Likud Knesset members or the people on the slate of Likud. My question to you is, if Netanyahu leaves the scene, whether because of legal reasons or political reasons or otherwise, are there any more serious people in Likud who are natural candidates to replace him?
There are no natural candidates to replace him. His preferred successor is Yariv Levin, the former Speaker of the Knesset. And Yariv Levin is a formidable politician, and he's not loud or garish. He's very, very smart. And he only gives the appearances of being a moderate because he's much more extreme than some of these people that we like to call extremists. But he is a candidate. The former mayor of Jerusalem.
Oh, Barkat.
Nir Barkat.
Yeah.
Does that happen to you already? Nir Barkat. I don't know, he spends a lot of money. I don't think he has it. He doesn't have, I don't think he speaks to Likudniks. And there's Yisrael Katz, who's very strong. He's also a former Minister of Finance, who's very strong with the organization. I don't know of any other surprise candidates. And if you ask me, and there could be somebody coming, Miri Regev, for example, who is a firebrand, but she has a large following and she will certainly compete for the job. And I don't know, I can't gauge the mood of the Likudnikim on the day they're going to have their primaries. So I would see her as an outside candidate as well. But if I had to put my money on somebody, it would be Yariv Levin. And that is not good news for his rivals because he's a formidable person. And one thing he'll do, he'll give back the Likud a veneer of respectability, which Netanyahu is now worried that they've lost, and he would give it back. Well, and Netanyahu, by the way, he could go any day because I am certain. I mean, I've heard. I don't have it as a that there are ongoing contacts on a plea deal. They go up or they go down, and it also depends on what's going on with the trial. But at a certain point, Netanyahu is going to have to decide, and so he could disappear from today till tomorrow.
You really think that's possible and maybe likely?
I think that if Netanyahu thinks that this whole elections prime minister thing is not working out, then yes, he'll think of something else.
Cool. Chemi, anything we left out? Anything you'd like to? We're nearing the top of the hour, so if there are any final thoughts or ideas or things that we left out in the questions, this is the time.
No, look, the only thing that I just started out with it, so I'm ending with it. I don't know that American, even those who follow, realize that we're in a very similar situation. When the January 6th committee started out, and on purpose they did it, the nucleus of their presentation was the big lie, right? They called it the big lie. And the big lie was this invention that there was massive forgeries in the elections. Netanyahu made up a big lie. And the big lie of Netanyahu is that he is being persecuted by a cabal, by a conspiracy, which includes policemen and journalists and judges, for which not one iota of evidence has ever been presented anywhere. At least Trump had, he had some machines that had conked out or something. Netanyahu doesn't have anything. And yet, I don't know if it's half, a little bit less, a little bit more, believe him. And if he wins the elections, they'll go with him, wherever he goes. I don't like historic comparisons, even though I'm surprised that the committee used the term big lie. This is like a make or break situation. And I'm hopeful that it won't happen and that, somehow things will work out. Right? Why shouldn't I hope that in the last minute, enough citizens will get enough brains in order to do what's right so that we don't get into this nightmare scenario? Because the one thing that you have to remember, if there is this right-wing government that we talked about, it'll be a major nightmare for American Jews. They've never faced such a situation. This is not begging, settlements. This is hardcore Hungary, Orban, Iran, whatever. And there will be, and the Israeli left, which usually talks to the American Jews, they will be up in arms and hysterical. And it will be a very, very unprecedented, difficult situation for American Jews if that happens. On that happy note.
On that happy note, yeah. So I want to thank everyone who joined us. I want to let you know that next week we're going to have another interesting webinar on a different topic, focusing on the bureaucracy of the occupation. I think it'll be really interesting. Madeline, thank you for joining us, and Chemi, thanks for a fascinating briefing.
Thank you.
And that brings our webinar to an end. Thank you, everyone.